Hi guys, and welcome to this week's Champion Bets webinar, a layman's guide to the science of pricing horses. Our key bets package form analyst, Cameron, is here with us tonight. Cameron, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Great to have you on board. Now, for everyone watching tonight's webinar and down the track on our website or on YouTube, tonight's webinar is fully interactive, so feel free to fire any questions in and we will endeavour to answer them as we move along. And don't forget, at the conclusion of this webinar, we'll be announcing the winner of tonight's competition, who wins a free month of our very popular Key Bets package. So looking forward to that. Without further ado, mate, I'm going to hand over to you, Cam.
Yeah, great. All right, thanks, mate. Thank you very much. Well, we talked the other day between us about what we might talk about in this webinar and trying to add a point of difference and trying to add something that wasn't just showing form and showing this is how I do the form, and everybody seems to talk about doing speed maps and doing the form and how they do it. And there's a lot of similarities. I watched Aaron Barbie's form the other day, and his webinar, I should say, the other day, and it was really good and really informative, and it showed me a couple of things about how somebody else does the form. But then as we're talking about, since we probably get a bit repetitive if we all start saying the same thing. And so we thought about, for this webinar, when Dan and I were discussing it, we sort of thought, well, what do we, what can we provide that is different? And we had the idea that maybe we could talk about a different angle, more the pricing aspect, more what goes into the maths of pricing a race up, because it's very important. It's more important than just coming up with your selections and trying to back your winner and trying to find who the likely winner is. Because at the end of the day, you have to, even if you don't even frame up a market, you have to have some sort of idea of what kind of price you'd like to take about a horse, or a sports team, or whatever you're doing the form for. And so having some knowledge of that and some knowledge of probabilities and even if it's just somewhere in your head, some sort of idea of what you're trying to, of what kind of price you're trying to get for a certain selection or a certain team, is a big head start. And so that's where I thought we'd go with this webinar. I was thinking about this a couple of months ago, actually. Even punters, even professional punters who don't really price things up, still use value in some way. Even if it's just that they think about it and think, well, and have a bit of an instinct, instinct is really something that's finely tuned through many years of doing something over and over until you really know where something should sit in your mind, and you have that instinct for it, or that wisdom for it. And so that those punters will still use value in some way in their approach. If you don't, there's rarely been in history anyone who can just pick things out and just back them regardless of price. And Don Scott, in one of his many stories that he had in his books, talked about a punter who went broke doing that, who was able to pick winners, but he was not a shopper of value, and so he lost all his dough because the bookies just scunned him with short odds. And so having an idea of how to price is something that's fundamental to betting successfully. And so I thought I'd talk about not just having some idea about how to price, but the real science of it and the real maths of it, and what probability is and how we arrive at a right probability and things like that. And so it's I hope it doesn't get too math heavy. I'll try to keep it really on point and not delve too much into maths. But it's really interesting to me. So I thought we could talk about it tonight. So shall we move on? This is the Champion Bets website. Here's something I prepared earlier, and this is a theoretical horse race. Okay, so we've got 5 theoretical horses in the race: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Excuse me. And as you'll see here, each of them I've given a rating to. We'll ignore things like weight. Let's say this is the final rating that's been arrived at after all things like weight have been adjusted for. Horse 1 has ended up, and this is on my scale of rating points, which you might have seen in a previous webinar I've done and things like that, and you might have heard me talk about. So on my scale, just for those who don't know, on my scale, 1 point is worth roughly half a length. So in this scenario, a rating of 100 is about 1 length superior to a rating of 98. So let's say these are the 5 horses, and these are the ratings I've given: 100, 98, 99, 102, and 95. So the 4 horse is my top pick, rating 102, and is 7 points or 3.5 lengths clear of the bottom one, 1 length clear of the top pick, second pick, and so on. So as you can see here, points off top, that's just simply how many points are off top. And from there, we have to turn that into a probability. That's fine, that's their rating, but what kind of probability are they? Let's say in the real market, this guy's, 350, he's 450, he's 25, he's 750, and he's 280. Let's go with that. I don't know what the percentages are of that, but let's say that's the real market. Actually, it's below 100, but never mind. So if this was our points off top, now Don Scott first introduced me to pricing back when I read his books back a long time ago, and this was a table, the abridged version. It went down further, but this is an abridged version of the table that he said he used, or he recommended people use, where if you were this many kilograms off top, you would apply this decimal chance to it. So I won't jump ahead. So basically, what would happen is if you were 0 points off top, you were given a chance of 1. So if there's no other horses in the race, you're obviously a probability of 1 to win the race. If it was a 2-horse race and the other horse was half a kilo off top, then you're a probability of 1, you're a probability of 0.9, which means that sum of the probabilities is 1.9, which means you would have a probability of 1 divided by 1.9 is 52.6%, and the other guy would obviously have a probability of 47.3%. So it was good. It was a handy way to price things up. So using Don's method, that was in kilograms, I converted my points here to kilograms, and you'd come up with decimals like that for every horse. So the horse who was on top obviously got a decimal as 1, and this guy who was 2 points off top, which is 1.4 roughly kilograms, got a decimal of 0.8, and so on and so forth, which added up to 3.07 decimals in the race. Converted back to 100% became that, and that would be your price. So on Don Scott's method of doing the form, you'd have $3.07, or if we just get rid of a decimal place there to make it easy, $3.10 about the top rater, $3.80 about the second rater, $5.40 about this guy, $6.10 about this guy, $15 about this guy. And at first glance, it sort of feels okay, but what Don's method tended to lack was any real flexibility and versatility. It's very rigid to say every race is the same. Every time you've got a half kilo difference, it's the same half kilo difference, and things like it's the same confidence and reliability in the figure and their ability to repeat the figure and things like that. It's a really rigid approach to pricing. This is $3.10 no matter what, and so it has to develop a bit from that, and you sort of say, well, that's a nice start point and a nice way to learn probabilities, but it's pretty basic. So then let's move on to the second tab. This is a normal distribution. So this will get a little bit mathsy here for a sec, but a normal distribution is, a lot of people will recognize this graph, is the probability of something occurring as it moves further away from the mean or the average. So it might be the probability that if you walk down the street, you're going to see a red car or something like that, and you can graph your likelihood given that you know what the average is. In this case, you set it 0, and what the standard deviation is. So if you think of it from a horse's point of view, you can think of a horse's performance graph as being like this, where this figure here, 0, is, say, the expected figure, or like the rating you've given it, or his average, or something like that. And all these figures, and therefore it's his most likely figure, the top point of the graph. And all these other ones are figures that are better than it, and all these other ones down here are figures that are worse than it. And so what you are doing is therefore graphing his likelihood. In this one, as you can see to the left, we've got about a 4.5% chance of doing the top figure or the mean, and the percentages drop as we go away. That's with a standard deviation of 9. So something you'll see, if you've got a standard deviation of 9, just means that on average they go 9 whatever units this is in this example of points or whatever it is away from the mean. If it was more fluctuating, if it was a standard deviation of 20, you'd end up with this flatter graph where there's only a 2% chance of doing the mean. If you had a standard deviation of 5, he's far more likely to do the mean up at 8%, and as you can see, it's sliding away to nothing's down the ends here because all of his likelihoods are charted within this small little range in here. If you had one of one, the graph will look stupid. It'll be like that. So putting it back to up towards 9-ish, that's sort of a nice looking curve for the standard deviation. So the reason I bring that up, of a normal distribution, I should say, the reason I did bring that up is because we can apply that to the pricing of a horse race. We can say, okay, well, if a horse follows roughly, or hopefully not too roughly, the rules of a normal distribution, we just need to know his standard deviation, and then we can plot what his likelihoods are and work out his true probability. So in here, back to our theoretical horse race, horses 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 have got ratings of 100, 98, 99, 102, 105. Let's say, we'll get back to this afterwards, but let's say they've had 1 run, 4 runs, 7 runs, 25 runs, and 14 runs. Now, I've plotted each of them to have a standard deviation of 7, just to give them all the same figure. Here, as I scroll down, can you see this clearly? Is this visible enough? I'm not losing
it.
Yeah.
No, absolutely, mate. Absolutely.
Okay, great. All right. So looking at this, we've got the ratings, horses 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's the rating I gave them. There's their standard deviation. Here is just there's their mean, which I just highlighted yellow. Given they've all got the same standard deviation, they've all got the same likelihood of doing their mean. Here is their likelihoods of doing all those other figures. And when put onto another table over here with going from 80 to 120, you can see where their averages are. And then over here, we can look at them all on graphs. So what we've got is all 5 of those horses on a graph here, where you've got horse 1. If you can see down here in the legend, horse 1 is the one in the blue, horse 2 is in the orange, horse 3 in the grey, horse 4 in the yellow, horse 5 in the blue. Over here is just that table again with that information. So horse number 4, our yellow horse, his graph, I'm pointing at the screen here with my finger, which I know you can't see, but it's sort of helping me to do it. If you imagine, or if you point at the yellow line and trace the yellow line, you can see that yellow line graph, that's horse 5. This is basically a graphical representation of a horse race, where the yellow line is in front at the end, at the right-hand side, as far as it's got the highest ratings in its best figures, but of course many of its other ratings fall below other horses. So if you look at that gap there that exists from horse number 4's mean, that gap between, so the right-hand side of his curve, you might say, that gap between him and the blue line, if his performance today falls somewhere in there, then he's likely to win, because a lot of what's behind him, a lot of what's to the left of him is the probability of those other horses. So if you think now of, say, choosing for each of these horses a random point on the graph, then you can come up with who's won the race. If our top pick does his mean, does his top point there, which is 102, but our guy in the blue does one of his less likely ratings, but 100 down 106, he beats him. But then you can work out all the probabilities of the race finishing a certain way based on the probabilities of each of these happening. So there's a 5.7% chance of this one happening here, of our top pick doing his mean rating, and there's only a 4.4% chance, if you can read that, of this guy doing 107, for example, which is our that's our top pick. I mean to say, of our second pick here doing 106, there's if I can get it to highlight, a 3.9% chance of him doing that. So he's a 3.9% chance to do that rating. So then you have to say, okay, well, if there's a 3.9% chance to do that rating, how often does that win him the race? Now, you couldn't do this with pen and paper, and thank God for things like Excel and other programs which can do the heavy calculations for us. But essentially, within this graph are all the possible, given that the figures are accurate, are all the possible ways that the race can finish. And in fact, not just that the way the race can finish as far as who will win, but who will run second, third, fourth, and fifth as well.
So Cam, just quickly on going on their best performance at the end of the graph,
Yep.
that's saying that there's not much between the other 4 horses, but there's a clear advantage to horse number 5.
Yeah, well, there is. If you look right down there, I mean, so as far as doing 120, horse number 5 has got a 0.6. Sorry, horse number 4, that is, the guy's 102, has got a 0.6% chance of doing it, as you can see there. That one there has got a 0.3% chance of doing it. These ones down here are 0.2% chance of doing it. So yeah, he does. That's because his mean is slightly higher. His expected rating, it's probably better to say expected rating rather than mean, but for the graph point of view, it's mean, is slightly higher. So yeah, he does have that chance. And as you see down the other end, he obviously, his lower ratings are still higher. But at the same time, if he performs here, this is our top rater, and if he performs here and does 92, then all of these ratings to the right of it, all of these figures that these guys can do to here are going to beat him, which means that 92 is very, very unlikely to win the race. It may win the race because there are figures that all those other horses can do which are left of that figure. But in reality, if he does 91, 92, whatever it is there, then he's extremely unlikely to win the race. To win the race. So it's really about quantifying the probability by using their distribution rather than just saying this is worth, X is always worth this. So that shows what they are. Now, what gets interesting, if I go to the next, are we okay with that before I move on, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, because we'll get back, we'll jump back and forth a little bit, right? Because that's still in a simple form right there. That's everybody looking very similar, just at different points on the graph. Now, coming here, we've got much of what we saw before. I changed some figures. Just let me click around for a moment. Actually, no, I'll leave it. I'll come back to it anyway. What I'll do, just copy and paste it over there. So we had this, points off top. There's all the stuff we saw before, the Don Scott price, etc., etc. Now, this price here is the result of all those calculations. So based on this graph, this price in the my price column is all those probabilities all summed up. So based on those, assuming that those distributions are true, the true price of this horse is $2.86. The true price of this horse is $5.26, $4.25 for this guy, $6.57, and so on, $13.67 for that guy. So this means that, for example, this guy here, he wins the race on those figures 7.3% of the time. So that the bottom pick does that. Now, it's not really for this webinar to go into the maths of all that, but to say that that's the result of calculating the likelihood of all of these events happening, and then the likelihood of other events being worse than them or better than them, and therefore working out who wins on each occasion. Okay, so once we've got that, we can come up with the true price of what they are. Now, I'll get to this thing over here in a minute. I just want to jump back to the graph again and say, so that's how they all are like that. And then go back to here and say, what if their standard deviations aren't 7? So the standard deviation, as I said before, indicates what their normal an average error is, or average difference from the mean is. Now, some horses are seven's about right for a lot of horses, but which is in my frame, so 3.5 lengths or 7 points. But a lot of horses are more consistent. You think of the sprinters who do the same thing over and over again, or as against lower class horses who might perform just every now and then. Red Zell's a really good example of a horse who he does 115, 116 on my figures every run, bar his last run. I think he'd done 8 or 9 times in a row, 115, 116 prior to his failure last start. So he's not a real top liner. At his best, he still would be blown away by the likes of Haylist and these kind of horses, let alone Black Caviar. But he's so solid, he's 115, 116, that his standard deviation will be much less than 7. So let's change their standard deviations to what I've got here, these figures here, and say that, okay, number 1 is slightly more consistent than normal. Number 2 is bang on about that 7. Number 3, the 99 horse, is quite consistent. He only has a standard deviation of 4. Number 4, the top pick, is slightly more consistent than normal in 5s. Actually, we'll put 5 out of 10 just to see something. And now we'll look at the graph. Things change a bit, you see. So our highest peak is in our horse number 3, the guy who has a standard deviation of 4, which is why we can see a high point, because a lot of his ratings are going to be around the rating we've given him because he's consistent. You see, if we went and changed that to a 2, you see he's up high while everybody else is down here. I'll just undo that because it makes the graph look silly. But as you can see, a lot of his ratings are here, whereas our guy with the standard deviation of 10, horse 5, which is in the light blue, he's got this shallow looking graph like this, where he's got a long range and spread of ratings because he's so inconsistent, obviously, with a standard deviation of 10. You see what I mean? And everybody else is somewhere in between. So when you go back to the Don Scott page, how do you account for that in here? Don would say you penalize the horse who's inconsistent and things like that, and that's fine. You can do that, but it's not exact and it's not scientific. All that is you saying, oh, he's inconsistent. How much is it worth? You know, it's a stab in the dark, really. Whereas this tells you how much it's worth, so long as you can accurately measure these, obviously. So when you do that, when you change those figures there, the prices change over here. This is interesting. This guy who was a longer shot with his standard deviation of 10, what do we got him at? 10. He actually comes in because he's got a greater chance of doing a high rating. He's got a rating of 95, but with a standard deviation of 10, that means he could be doing up 105. He's got a greater probability of doing these high ratings now. So he actually trims up. If we put him back down at 7, he goes out to $11.50 from his $6 something. Put him back to 10 again, and he's down to $6.50. Because with that inconsistency, or with that volatility, it means that he's got a lot of figures up here which are very competitive and still a chance at winning the race. And if you look here, he's got this kick at the end because he hasn't run out of his figures yet. So that's where everything changes. And again, you can't do this on pen and paper. You need to be able to have the formulas in there to calculate these figures for you and come up with a price. Now I'm just going to fix those standard deviations up. I'll go back in here and put them to something more reasonable, say like that. And then he's back out at his $11 odd. Okay, and we've got a graph like that. Now, that's essentially how you correctly price a horse's chance, but it depends on a couple of things. One, it depends on your ability to obviously predict a rating well, but then this figure is very important. If you get that standard deviation figure wrong, then it blows out your whole market. So just using the actual standard deviation doesn't work, because a good example is Santa Ana Lane, the horse who won the Goodwood on the weekend. Now it's probably got a regular standard deviation, but it was always going to be able to run a good race on the weekend because its previous run it had stormed home and hit the line really hard, and it was early in its prep, and it just, and you watch the replay and thought, oh, that horse is ready to peak and ready to hold. You would have said to yourself, it's got a lower standard deviation today because you've watched it and realised that it's in good form. Whereas a horse who you're sort of speculating about its figure, you'd give a higher standard deviation to because you're not sure. So these figures are not something you can actually really come up with just automatically out of their past history. There's something that when you're doing the form, you get a feel for doing, sort of say, well, is he a 7? Is he an 8? Is he a 9? Is he a 2 or a 3? And Red Zal, you'd be down at a 2 or a 3, giving him his 116, 115. Whereas some other sprinters racing against him, you'd be giving a lower figure with a 6 or 7 standard deviation. So, and then you get to that graph and you get to the final figure. Now that's hard to it's hard to get right, but it does come up with the right figures. So there is a shortcut way to get there, sort of thing. Do you think we're okay with that before I get to the next section?
Yes, mate. All going well.
Okay. I tend to talk a lot and often quickly, and so I just want to make sure that I guess people can ask questions and say, can you go back to point 1? But I want to give everybody that's hard for a lot of people to be able to do, and the maths of getting to this price here is very complicated, and beyond the layperson, to be honest. So I have shortcutted it, and I want to give people this ability, and especially if you're doing the form yourself, you can use this method to shortcut it in this what I call logarithmic table of chances, which you'll hopefully see down that tab there. Now, you remember Don Scott's table back here where he said if you're X kilos off top, that's how many, that's what decimal chance you are of winning the race. Well, this is a newer version of that, you might say, where we're calling it in my points rather than his kilograms, where these points figures correspond to your decimal chance of winning the race. Same kind of thing, where if you're 0 points off top, you get a 1, and so on and so forth. However, this figure here is very important, and this figure is essentially like the standard deviation, and it applies to every horse in the race. So I've set it at 1.3 so that you can see where horses, what they would get if they were X number of points off top. And so if we bring in, which we'll go back to that in a sec, but if we change this, if we're more confident, we change it up to 1.35, you'll see that these horses down here get a lesser, their figures go down. If we change it to 1.4, everybody goes down a bit more. All this is, for every point off top you are, as you'll see in the formula there, your chance of winning is decreased by the previous figure divided by that by your factor there of 1.4. If it was 1.0, that would mean that you thought that every horse was of an equal chance. Every horse has got a 1. So because 1 divided by 1 equals 1, so everyone's previous one is 1 divided by 1. So if you were just slightly confident 1.01, there'd be virtually nothing going down. So this is a shorter way to do it, and what I often use, because this is a way to change your aggressiveness of a race, and that's all, and that is essentially changing the standard deviation on every runner at once. As I say, it's a shortcut way, and it's much easier to work with than with giving every horse a standard deviation and things like that. So in here, in this race here, which we've got the Scott decimal, Don Scott decimal, etc., what his price would have been, what my price is based on those standard deviations I entered back in here. Now, using a figure of 1.28, the prices would be this. The reason being, the top pick obviously gets a decimal of 1. This guy would get a 0.61 and this one a 0.37. Now, I'll just leave it on that horse for a sec. Those who can see that formula, but you don't need to look up that table. All you actually need to do, I'll put that down to 1.28, so it's the same as the other one, so you can see sort of that scale. But this is, I've got to explain this the best way I can, but essentially, because you don't have every horse being exactly 1 point off top, etc., etc., the formula is that it's 1 divided by your factor, 1.28 in this case, raised to the power of how far off top you are. So that's how you work out what their decimal probability is, and then it sums up to 2.64. You normalize that back to 100%, and you come up with their probabilities, and that equals their price. In this scenario, this guy is $2.64, which, well, in this occasion is just coincidentally exactly the same as that there. But for example, this one is 553 compared to that was 876. That's to do with the standard deviations, obviously. But if I were to go a little bit slightly more aggressive, 1.3, he would drop to 256. This guy would go out a bit. If I were to go a bit more, say 1.33, he becomes a 245 chance. This guy's out at 18. You might think of the more you increase this figure, the more your range in your market stretches. If you keep going out, if you go to something silly like that, you're even money, 440, and then you're at $34 about this. And so that's a way to introduce the same features of this without having to worry about entering standard deviations and things. So I'll just sort of repeat it. Basically, this is your figure of confidence, and for every, let's put this in here, points off top, call it the initial decimal chance, say 0, equals 1 divided by the factor raised to the power of how far off top they are. So when you are nothing off top, your chance would be 1. If you're 0.25 off top, it's that, and so on and so forth. 1.3. That's a formula. And then you apply that to every horse in the race. They get a decimal chance based on that. You normalize it back to 100%, and you come up with a market. And that is, as I say, that's a shortcut way. It's not the same as this, but it's workably similar to give you similar results and not have to be guessing at standard deviations and things like that. I mean, this is a longer version and a more accurate version if you get your figures right. This is a really good working way of getting probabilities and much more accurate than this, for example. That's where we're at.
Excellent. Well, I've certainly learnt a lot more than what I previously knew, Cam.
No, I'll probably talk through all that a bit quick, but that's the maths of pricing. Well, that's the maths of probability, I suppose. And well, the maths of probability is that, and that's, as I say, normal distributions. And that's a horse race, as I say up here when you see sample. That is a race. That is the horses doing their various figures, and all the probabilities all lie in there. Not just the win probabilities either. All the exotic probabilities, everything lies in there. But as I say, it's not something you do pen and paper. Using this is a really good way, and just through your own confidence levels, things like that, changing this figure around is a really good way of pricing up a race based on how you think that they're going to go and your confidence levels of them going those figures.
We've got some questions firing in. I've got David says this is much better than the stats I did at uni.
Thank you, David.
We've got one here from Gary. Where can we access the logarithmic table of chances or get the formula?
Yeah, the formula is there, what I showed. So going back to it here, I've still got it on screen. So it is, with this figure that's highlighted in blue being your aggressiveness figure, etc. It is just 1 divided by your aggressiveness figure raised to the power of how far off top they are. It's a simple formula. But make sure you get it right. But then also, this is in my scale of points, for example, which are half length. If this was kilos, 1.3 would be ultra aggressive. You know, if you're kilos, you'd be down at 1.15 or whatever, something like that, to get to a similar kind of level of aggressiveness. So you need to adapt it to your scale. You might have some completely different scale where it's in the thousands per horse, and you'll need, 25 per point or something ridiculous. So it's all about what scale you're rating in, assessing in. For me, around about these figures is around right. I find that most of my races are somewhere between 1.3 and 1.5, somewhere there. 1.35, 1.5, somewhere there. Based on how I do it.
I've got a question from Mark, and that kind of sort of touched on it just then. How do you come up with your factor?
Yeah, well, individual, it's feel, really. I start out for every race at about 1.4, 1.45, and then go through the race. As I say, if Red Zell's top pick in the race, I'll be more aggressive because I figure he's a much narrower band of graph. Black Caviar would be the same. She's, she was very consistent. Well, she wasn't consistent in that she didn't always do her top marks, but she always did what she had to. And then if it's a race like a couple of the races I looked at Townsville today, then I'll drop the figure back a bit because they're less reliable. And so it's really about that. Then again, like, there was differences. There was one race today at Townsville, a race I tipped in, actually, race 2, where they were really quite reliable. They're only low to mid 90s horses, but they were quite reliable. And the favourite was very reliable at his mark around 94, and he was the one we were opposing, and he got beat, which is good. But that was race 3 to go. Well, look, these horses are really good in their low 90s figures. Where there was a race later on the program where they were sort of late, high 80s figures, but really inconsistent. And so you go a lower figure on that graph to indicate that they are less consistent and mirror that sort of changing standard deviation that you see, here that I'm mucking around with, So again, yeah, to answer, it really is a feel thing, and as I say, your scale will be different for whatever your assessment method is, and your points or kilos or lengths or whatever it is that you're using, it'll be different. But using that logarithmic table of chances, as so you don't need a table. I've just put that there to show it. You just need that formula. That's all you need, and everybody, wherever they fit on that table that goes from 0 to infinity, wherever they fit can just be worked out with that simple formula.
Cam, a question from Mark. What sort of success rate does your system have in relation to Don Scott's method?
I guess I'd need to know exactly what you meant by success rate by that. It's a hard one for me to answer without really knowing what you mean by that. If you mean strike rate, actually that could be a topic for another webinar as well. Success rate, it's interesting. Don used to talk about how he won 10% on turnover over the course of his career. If we just talk about profit as a thing for a sec, then Don came back and he couldn't win in the late 80s when he started betting, and he hadn't changed. He should have stayed retired. He hadn't changed his methods at all, and he was still trying to do the same old weight ratings without really any adjustments, and that wouldn't stand up, and he couldn't really find any overs and things. Don, when he first was going well in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, was well ahead of the game. There was no one out there doing anything like what he was doing, so he was ahead of the market. He without doubt in the world, his predictions, his prices, I should say, were more informative than what the bookmakers markets were, and so he had a massive advantage in that respect. Bookmakers markets, or just the general market overall, has improved so much in the time since then that now the markets have well and truly overtaken what Don was originally doing. Bill Benter came up with a really good way of measuring the success of a method, of a model, and the success of the market method, and of the market prices, I should say. And you can see, using that method, you can see every year that the market is gradually getting better and better. And I would love to be able to trace it back, get the figures from the 50s, and see what the scores it got were on Bill Benter's, what he called the pseudo R squared of the market's ability to predict the race. Because in Hong Kong, where Benter made his mark, the market has been gradually improving, especially as computer models come in and start to dominate the market. So success I like to think of is your ability to predict the outcome of the event and have a higher pseudo R squared than what the market does, and things like that. So it's hard to compare to Don because he's a completely different era. He outstripped the market probably by more than anybody does today. And so in that way, his methods were better at their time. If you say it's like comparing Phar Lap to Black Caviar today, I'm neither of those horses in human terms, but to compare from different eras, Don probably outstripped the market by more than any punter in our history, and yet his methods wouldn't win today because the market has improved that much. So it's a really hard one to compare in that respect.
Cam, does your reliability figure depend on the horse's consistency or your confidence on the race?
Yeah, both of those things for sure. Confidence on the race often comes from the horse's consistency and therefore the horse's reliability as well. But certainly, it's well, though they are separate issues, because you can have confidence in say your top rater, but he might be first up from a spell, and so you can't be completely confident. He might be quite a consistent horse, but he's still first up from a spell, for example, and so you can't know for sure. So it's definitely both, and in that respect, it is a feel thing. And I've thought about, and I've tried sometimes to muck around with trying to automate the figure, but it's just not worth it. It's just something that really has to be a feel thing for the race and what you think, and then you'll muck around with it and you'll key in something, and you'll look at the way the prices fall, and you'll say, oh, no, that's too aggressive, or it's not enough. No, I need to. And it's after a while, you just sort of get this gut feel of where it needs to sit.
Cam, I've got a question from Glenn. Most form analysts concentrate on one region or state. How are you able to cover all states? I'm guessing that's because of your rating system is generic. Yeah. It can go nationwide.
Yeah, I spent forever doing these ratings, doing this model since I left Mark's. I worked with Mark Reed. I've been working on and obsessing with perfecting the ratings model, and so it's not just about Victorian ratings or WA ratings or New South or Queensland. It's about countrywide ratings. I must say, I don't put much time into Tassie. I should do more in Tassie. But it's about, for me, I'm about the figure and using my knowledge of what horses do in certain circumstances to predict. I've got a good friend and cousin of mine who uses my model as well, and he is more of the analyst who really watches their replays and delves into their quirks and patterns and things like that, which I do partly as well, but I'm more numbers based in my approach. And so being more numbers based, I sort of look for the patterns. It's not straight patterns because straight patterns can be programmed in a computer. It's more about sort of, again, it's like the feel for the number. It's about the feel for, all right, what's this horse going to do today, based on, where you get a sense of it's done something in the past that you can get back to today. And having seen tens of thousands of horses, you sort of get a sense for form patterns and the way they peak and then dip and then peak again and things like that. And so you're just trying to anticipate those, and you get them wildly wrong. But you can also find things that the market misses, and that's that's the key, is obviously to find things that the market misses, isn't it?
Cam, I think that's just about all we've got time for. I think we've covered everything. I just wanted to say thank you very much for your time. I know I got something out of it, and judging from the questions and feedback that we've got from the audience, that they've all enjoyed it as well. So thanks again.
No worries. Just lastly, if they do have any further questions about that formula, etc., just review the YouTube. It really is a simple formula. Just think about how it applies, and if you need to do one of those tables to help you along, do so, and make sure you get this figure here, this figure I'm highlighting, right, and then it'll help your pricing enormously when you're doing the form yourself. And yep, not a problem. It's been fun.
Absolutely, guys. This guy is a genius and flying at the moment. Get on board. I'll no doubt get in touch with everyone over the next couple of days. Cam, thanks again for your time. And the winner of tonight's free month of our Key Bets package is Mr. S. Kirby. So I will be getting in contact with him. Thanks for tuning in. This will be on the website tomorrow and also on YouTube tomorrow afternoon. Thanks again, guys.
Thanks, guys.